I'll give it like a few seconds to get a couple of people up, and also to do like a little bit of my admin. But good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
1 second.
Buen días.
Good evening.
Is buen dias?
Oh, buenas noches. I don't know.
Yeah, it's buenas noches. It's 8
Yeah.
o'clock. Yeah.
The
Sorry.
sun's still up and there's every day. So
Oh, that's true. That's true. I think it just went down here. Okay. Um, I want to say again, thank you all for um, every time I call you guys and I'm like, hey, can you all like jump on? You do. So I want to thank you, DJ and Neil. And definitely I want to thank you, Lori, for joining us tonight. Um, how was everybody's day? Just set the pace. How was your day, Lori?
It was pretty good. We are doing some stuff where my daughter is in. She's learning what it looks like to be in a film production. So she is. It's been an interesting process for me too. So
How old
um,
is she?
she's 13.
Oh,
So yeah, trying to expose her to different things so that she can make decisions about what she's going to do, so she can support me in my old age. That's my estate
amen. Amen.
Get the kids trained up.
It's true. I tell my children all the time, you are my investment. Okay.
Absolutely.
wow,
I want a
I
return
wow,
on my
do.
investment. Yeah.
wow. That's
Why is that wrong? Why is that wrong?
so. My mom told me
Mm-hmm.
when you get married,
Mm-hmm.
your family comes first. You don't have to worry about me. I lived a good life, and she's already supposedly planned everything. My mom, she has a burial plot, all this stuff taken care of, right? So
Okay.
I
You're
so
still gonna be my investment. I've invested in them. There's no problem in them returning, like I'm getting back my investment. That's the way I see it.
100%, or you
Hmm.
just at least something.
Something.
Okay,
My love should be worth something. That's the way I see it.
of course, of
Give me a
course.
second. Um, I was trying to tag you guys in this.
So,
It's doing
question, Lori, you are in what type of law? Just are you in just family law or
Yeah.
Lori? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. What kind of law do you practice? Is it criminal, family, or
S-
hello?
Can you hear us?
There we go. Yes, I'm sorry. The page jumped up and it disoriented me. Technology. I feel like I'm more tech savvy than some folks and not as tech savvy as the next generation. You
That's
know,
what I
it's one of those
that's
things you start feeling like you're getting left behind.
that's what I do for a living.
Um, no, so our firm, Reed Thomas Law Group, practices estate planning. We do appeals, we do family law, we do personal injury, and we do civil litigation. And sometimes people go, "Oh, those things don't mesh or whatever," but they actually do, because civil litigation, family law are all kind of the same rules. And so it's helpful to know, like, I only have to learn one set of rules, so to speak, and it kind of applies. And then there's some nuances. Same thing with estate planning. There's nuances to that. And I've been doing that work for a while. And a lot of people don't think that estate planning fits into like divorce, or even civil litigation. And it absolutely does, because, like, whenever, as a part of our services, whenever we do a divorce for someone, one of the other things that we do, either at consult or right after we onboard a client, is we discuss estate planning. Like, you're going through a divorce, you don't like this person anymore, you don't love them anymore. Do They're your next of kin though. So do you really want them making decisions about whether you live or die? I think we need to execute some advanced directives, right? So that's a part of like what we kind of build into our divorce work on the front end. Let's get some advanced
Wow.
directives done. Let's get some power of attorneys done for other people so they can't go into your bank accounts and like those kind of things. Because we try to do a whole like 360 approach, and a lot of people don't think of it like that. But because I have a background and my law partner has a background in estate planning, we do think of it like that. Because I've had a client one time, she was a teacher. Shout out to DJ, who's her principal on the line, right? But she was a teacher, and she was with this guy for like 20 years, and he cheated on her repeatedly, and she finally like had enough of it, and she said, "I'm getting a divorce." But she had put up with it for so long, and she was at retirement age and everything else. And I was telling her, "Hey, let's go ahead and get all this stuff done." We got the divorce, and about 6 months later, she dropped it.
What?
The only thing I can say is thank God she was happy when she went out of here. But but also, had she not had contact with me for the divorce, she'd have never even had anything in place for her estate plan for her daughter. We wouldn't have talked about her retirement accounts that she'd worked so hard for.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Did it stick? Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things I definitely want to ask her, and I'm sorry for doing all this admin stuff. Oh, you're back.
There you go.
Yep.
Stuck for a minute. Oh yeah, no. I was just saying, that's why we start doing our estate planning talks on the front end now instead of on the back end, because I mean, any of those kind of processes are extremely stressful for folks, right? And you don't think about it, but COVID really was an eye opener for a lot of folks. A lot of people went out of here that nobody planned on them leaving.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of folks left their families holding the bag,
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that from a perspective of like, I just buried a family member a few weeks ago that was near and dear to my heart. And thankfully there wasn't a lot that had to be done because she had some planning done on the front end, but it still made it it was a very difficult process. And just planning her funeral, we were like, we were kind of getting into some little disagreements about that, right? Could you imagine trying to divvy up somebody's spoons and forks and like
yeah
and dealing with the emotion of losing them? Like, how is that going to work when you have 4 or 5 kids?
True. One of the things that we talked about when we kind of like had a meeting last week was and actually Desiree brought this up. Not making sure that you change beneficiary. You want to give that example, Des?
Yeah. So my mom died like 16 years ago, right? And so I just walked in the bank one day. I went to do something else, and I was like, let me check and see, who's my beneficiary. And she said my mom's name, and I'm like, what? And she was like, yeah, this hasn't been changed from the time I opened that particular, maybe a couple of years after I opened it, like 1995.
What?
Because I've been with this, I'm with the Educators Credit Union, right? She was like, once you put her on there has never been a change. But she has been deceased for 16 years. So if anything had happened, it would have just been like an issue because. And so when we were talking the other night, I thought about my car, my house.
Yeah, the nice one you just bought, right there.
It's like
I got eye on it as well.
I mean, I only have 2 kids, and it's 2 boys. So I want to duke it out, but I'm just
no, you don't want them to duke it out. You don't want them to duke it out.
I was just surprised because I go to the bank frequently, and it never crossed my mind. And a really, really good friend of mine died in January. And ever since then, I was like, oh, well, let me, And so now I'm trying to take things off the list and check it out to make sure that it's not an issue if something happened to me, So,
So the biggest things are going to be your 401k, your IRA, your life insurance, and your bank accounts. Those are going to be the 4 areas you're really going to need to kind of make sure you kind of check off and do a frequent check every, very often. I would say every 2 years is a good time frame. You don't want to overwhelm yourself with this process because it can be overwhelming, kind of thinking about your death, right? And who you're leaving stuff to. But you want to make sure you make those changes because, again, I dealt with this again years ago, about 8 or 9 years ago. My dad died. He had like, we thought he had everything together. He had an illness. We knew he had an illness. Like he said he had documents together. We couldn't find any new wills. The last will we found was from 1983. Didn't even include my youngest sister, and it was one of those things that it was like, okay, wait, what? So the other thing that I'm going to tell you is that it's not just enough to change your beneficiaries, right? You need to actually have a conversation with the beneficiaries, and you need to say to them, hey, I would like to leave you this when I pass. And like, I would like to leave you this 401k when I pass. You need to have that conversation, because it might not be feasible for you to leave the 401k to your son, for example, if your son's making $300,000 a year, and by you leaving him his 401k, it's going to bump him up into another tax bracket. Mm-hmm. Because he has 5 years to get that money out of that 401k, mm-hmm. and he's got to pay taxes on the money he receives, because you put the money in tax free. Mm-hmm. So that's not going to work well for him, right? Mm-hmm. Or depending on if they change the rules again, he might have less time to do that. So what he might say is, well, why don't you leave it to your grandkids? Or why don't we look at other creative ways to leave it or do something with it that doesn't involve it all coming to me, or whatever else. The same thing with, and the life insurance, you don't have to worry about as much, but you still need to tell them. And then you need to tell your family members, whoever you trust, this is the company that has my life insurance policy. Here's the address, the phone number, all of those things. Because when time comes, they need to be able to pull that slip and give to the undertaker, to the funeral home, to be able to pay for your burial expenses. Mm-hmm. Funerals are expensive. Mm-hmm. Right. It's like almost $10,000 just for a standard funeral nowadays. Mm-hmm. True. And that's not even fancy.
So, Lori, you said, I'm a note taker. So
no, you're good.
You said the 401 IRA bank account, and what else?
So I'll break it down just the 3 categories. I said 4, but so 401k IRA, so retirement accounts.
Right. Okay.
Your bank accounts, and then your now you see, because you asked me, I can't remember.
Life insurance.
Your life insurance. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Now, let me also note, you do not want to make the mistake of adding somebody to your bank account.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Necessary.
Okay.
If you do that, you are basically giving them whatever assets you have in your bank account by putting their name on it. So if they go tomorrow and draw all your money down, there's absolutely nothing you can do about it.
Can I ask a question? You mentioned 401k, right? I know within the last 20 years, companies stopped doing the retirement stuff, right? Everything is either 401k, IRA, all that stuff.
Yeah, they're not doing pensions anymore. A lot of them are moving away from that. Yep.
And so for people that have a pension, would that falls in the same category, or you just have to make sure that your beneficiaries are correct?
So you do need to make sure that's going to fall in that same category of retirement. You're going to make sure your beneficiaries are correct. Pensions are so different because each pension is structured differently, right? Based on what kind of collective bargaining the employees had when the pension was created and things like that. So if you're not sure how your pension's going to pass, or if it even can be passed, you need to talk to your benefit administrator. That person will be able to give you all the details. They know your pension inside and out. So you'll just need to be able to say, well, how, what's going to happen next, and what else do I need to do, or what do I need to do to prepare this next person, and have that conversation with that person. And again, you really only need to have this conversation maybe once every couple of years with your family member, whoever it is that you, or a friend, whoever it is you trust to do to kind of administer everything for you, and just make sure everything's gotten, is done about once every couple of years. That's it. It's not a major process. Just, this is where everything is. This is what, you don't have to tell them the amounts, but this is where everything is. Because I know, as some folks get real sketch about, about saying to people, hey, I got $1 million life insurance policy. Right. They'll, I can't I can remember when I've heard, I've heard some folks go, "You try to take me out for my life insurance. You gonna pull the plug on me because I got some life insurance." You ain't got to tell them how much it is. You just need to say where it is and how to access that information.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to add is when my father-in-law passed, I learned a lot in the state of New York, right? Everything has to be in escrow for like a whole year so the debtors can come and they can get their stuff, right? But what's left over, do you have to pay taxes on that? That's the question for me.
So I don't do tax law, so I can't answer that question for you. That would be a question for an accountant. So when you do estate planning, it really should be done in conjunction with the services of an accountant and somebody that you trust that has, I would say, a CPA, and somebody who does actual, like, who makes sure that they have dealt with estate planning or understand estate planning, because not every CPA does that kind of work, right? So they don't do taxes for estates sometimes. So you want to make sure that you seek out somebody who has. Once you have your estate plan done, even in the draft phase, when you're getting the documents from the lawyer to review for final execution, you can take it to your accountant and say, is this going to put anybody in trouble? Or, based on the current laws right now, right? And that kind of thing. And again, you can't plan for everything because the laws are going to change, things are going to change. You just don't know. And I did need to say this. This is the lawyer in me. So this is good. This put my Esquire hat on here. I am not giving legal advice to anybody who is watching or who is on. I meant to say that earlier. This is very generalistic advice about estate planning. And so there's my disclaimer. I am not creating an attorney-client relationship with anybody on at this point in the universe who might watch this now or later in the future. There we go. That's my...
I should have said that as well.
Lori, let me ask you a question. So... for example, you said that you shouldn't have anybody on your account. I think I've experienced it. And so I was talking with the group and, my mom was sick to a point I thought she was going to pass away, but she was getting older. And so at some points, some of us have older parents that we might need to write a check or conduct business, right? So my question to you is, on my mom's bank account, she had my name and her name. So my question is that and or an or?
So personally, I wouldn't have anybody on my bank account, period. Right?
Okay.
You can execute a power of attorney. That power of attorney, you can make it available for, and that's almost in any state in the union. You can have that power of attorney be valid for a year. You can have that power of attorney be valid or, expire. Once a person dies, the power of attorney is no longer valid. If a person has not designated beneficiaries in their bank account or anything like that, then that money has to go. You got to go to probate to be appointed as the executor to move that money. And anybody who moves that money who's not been appointed or given permission by a court is usually going to get in trouble for doing that. And that's I can speak. I'm a Georgia licensed attorney. I can speak for the way Georgia works as an example. And so I'm assuming that it's going to be pretty similar in most states. And so the power of attorney gives you the right to be able to, if it's designated in there, gives you the right to be able to write checks. If you're designated to be able to sell property, you can sell property. You can, it's all kinds of different financial, things that you can do. If it gets to the point where the person is not capable of making like those kind of decisions or executing a power of attorney, in the very last resort, you want to go to the court and ask the court to appoint you as a conservatorship as a guardian over the person's property. And I say that very last resort because now you have a government entity in your business. A lot of times Black folk don't like people in their business. I'm just being real.
Right.
Every year you got to file returns, right? To let them know exactly every dollar you've spent, every cent that you've spent for that person and whether or not it was justified and all that stuff. You can get a fee for acting as a conservator, but and again, it does have its place. So you might do a power of attorney for your mom. If it's just you and your mom, that that's it. But if you got 10 siblings, it might be less of a headache to do a conservatorship, right? Where every dollar is managed by, and your mom has a nice size estate, like $500,000 or something like that in bank accounts and retirement, because then every dollar is going to be scrutinized by the court. You got to put up a bond for yourself, all of those kinds of things. And then none of your siblings can accuse you of, or try to take you to court or do anything of trying to like diminish your parent, your mom's assets. You can say, look, I'm being reviewed by a court. The court's all up in our business and the expenses that I'm making. And if you have any extraordinary expenses that aren't normal, you could petition the court to be able to spend those things, get permission, those kind of things. And then there's a nice track record and paper trail of everything.
And so I'll put this out here, Lori. So I was on my mom's bank account, and my mom is from St. Croix. She knew it's just two of us. Nobody was touching her account unless she said so. So, and I know it's different because I've seen it go completely the other way.
Yeah, I have too.
So that was one of the biggest questions as far as even with my kids now. So this for me is like giving me some enlightenment of what I need to do in the very near future.
Right. And one of the things that we talked about is the fact that even having this conversation for a lot of people, it's like, I'll wait. You kind of put it off, right? But again, like you said, COVID showed, and even past COVID, even on our small little island, like it's like every time you turn around, there's someone, and it's not an elderly person, right? How soon should someone start thinking about or actually doing something? Because I listened to something and it talked about the fact, once you're 18 and you've acquired something, you should put something in paper on.
I don't know that I would say as soon as you turn 18, you should do something, you should put something on paper, that kind of thing. Right. But something like that, I mean, because anything can happen, right? You could be you could be under 18 and you and your parents are in a car accident, for example. Their parents die first and then you die second. And if you're 13, you're not going to have a will, right? You're not going to have any of those kind of things. There are people who put their put their children in their businesses as an owner. There's people who put where they start acquiring assets before they're 18. So I would say look at kind of the level of assets that you have and what you are actually getting. Like once you start accruing assets, and I would say assets being like, you got a car, you got, real estate, things like that. When you start accruing those things, you need to start looking at doing a written estate plan in the form of a will. Outside of that, I mean, I don't know that I would tell somebody that they absolutely, have to have this long and drawn out will. I remind people all the time that Michael Jackson had a $500 will.
A what?
Wow.
Michael Jackson had a very basic $500 will.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And again, it did its purpose, right? He probably didn't have very many assets actually in his name at the end of it, right? Because people who have money know how to plan. They know how to put things in businesses' names. They know how to put things in a trust name. So there probably wasn't very much. And so it was probably just a catch-all will. So if there was anything that happened to be left over, then it would go to however he wanted to in the will. Okay. And so I say it in two ways. It's never too early to have a will, but it's never too late to have a will unless you're dead. Right. But it's also not something that you absolutely have to have. And I probably get some slack from some other, estate planning lawyers. It's not something you absolutely have to have if you're planning in other ways. So if you set your bank accounts up with a beneficiary, if you set your life insurance up on a beneficiary, if you set some of those things up on a beneficiary, you're not really talking about a lot of stuff that's going to be left in your estate.
Makes sense.
But even just if as you start getting your first job, if you're 18, 20, whatever, and you start getting your first job and you're just trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do? Paying a couple $100 to consult with an attorney is going to be worth its weight in gold overall. To just know how you should move and when is the right time for your situation based on your state law.
Okay.
So I work in a building where there's a 2 or 3 attorneys that's all they do.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't able to talk to the one attorney because he's out of town. It's spring break for his kids, so he's out of town. But I was talking to the secretary, and she told me that in New Jersey, a lot of people are going away from trust and they're dissolving them and all that stuff. And then she turns to me and she says, if you're the administrator of the trust or whatever they leave, you can get sued on behalf of. I was like, what? So I didn't even know that. I thought like having a trust, something like that, would just protect you from any kind of craziness. But
no. So let me just make sure I explain to everybody who's watching like what a trust is.
Okay.
So a trust is basically a vehicle, right? And you basically take your bags, you take all your assets, you say, okay, I'm going to put them in this vehicle. I no longer own this vehicle. This isn't my vehicle anymore. It belongs to the trust because the trust is basically seen as its own separate entity. A trust gets an EIN number, files its own taxes, all of those kinds of things. So it's a whole separate entity. But a trust without a person behind it is nothing. So there has to be a trustee that actually administers what the outline, what the person who set up the trust said that they want it done. So you have to worry about getting sued when you as the trustee are not administering the trust in the way that the trust is supposed to be administered in accordance with the rules. Now, if it's something that's there that you can't do anymore because, it's illegal or they're asking for something that's, you can't do, then you just always act proactively as the trustee, and you file something in court and you ask the court to make the decision about what happens. Then you have some insulation. So a lot of times people try to just skip steps in what happens, right? And the same thing. I mean, trust is a similar vehicle to creating a business to kind of hold assets. You see a lot of people, creating these LLCs, and they got 20 million LLCs by the time, because they're investing in real estate and they're investing in this, or you got a water company or whatever it might be, right? They're selling bottled water or whatever, And so then they pass, and then they leave nobody in charge of their business because they have no business succession plan. And then the business doesn't get renewed, or people don't take over, or the people who are in charge of the business, if it's a successful business, start infighting about who's going to be in charge because there's no plan in place. Then they end up having to go to court and litigate it all out and do all the things that they got to do because, again, it was a failure to plan in the first place. So all these vehicles are great, right? Great ways for you to diversify your money, put assets in different things, get certain tax deductions that you can talk to your accountant about. But if the person doesn't manage it right, or you don't plan well for it, you might as well not even do it.
So I guess the big question then is what we talked about. I guess pros and cons between a will and a trust. I think that was a big conversation for us.
We did.
I mean, it's not a either or. It's a both. You always want to do a will, that even if it's just a pour over will, what's called a pour over will. And so your will say that any asset that's left remaining that shows up in the will that would otherwise be probated, goes into the trust.
Or you can have both. So you should do both.
You should do both. If you're doing a trust, you should do a will as well. You shouldn't just have one or the other. You should have it. You should have, because what happens if you get an asset right before you die, or whatever, and you don't have, or not even before you die, and you don't have a chance to transfer it over into the trust, then it's got to be accounted for in the will.
I assume that as long as you had a trust, everything that you own goes into the trust.
Nope, you have to actually deed it over there. So if you have a car and you want it to be owned by the trust, you got to actually sign the title over. If you have a house, you have to actually refinance your house for the trust to basically like take over your house to take over the note on the house.
Okay, wait a minute. I am like completely baffled at this.
This is like,
So, Lori, what you're saying? This
I learned that doing closings in really rich areas. I was like, oh, why are you refinancing? Oh, you have to. Oh, okay. And this was before I started doing estate planning work. I was doing.
So if I do a trust right now, if I sit with an attorney and I do a trust right now, I have to turn everything over into the trustee's name.
You don't have to turn everything over into the trust.
Okay.
You choose to turn over what you want to turn over into the trust, right? Mm-hmm. So there are a couple of different types of trust. There is a revocable trust. It sounds exactly like it is. You can revoke it. And there's an irrevocable trust. Revocable trust, you still own the assets because you can revoke the trust. But it has different tax implications. An irrevocable trust, you cannot, once you give it, no backsies, right? And it's not your asset anymore. It doesn't belong to you.
So if you put your house in the trust, you can't take any equity out of it?
The trust can take equity out of it. And then the trust would have to lend you the money. And you'd need to have an agreement to lend the money to yourself as a loan that you pay back, or you could be taxed on the money that you get as a distribution from the trust as income for you personally.
Wow.
Again, this is the reason why I say it can be very convoluted. This is the reason why I say you really need to talk to an accountant.
Right.
And an attorney.
Like those things kind of go hand in hand. So you need to kind of talk to that person so that you understand, okay, the attorney is telling you can do all these wonderful and great things, but what does it really mean? And a lot of estate planning attorneys are not tax attorneys. I'm not a tax attorney. I don't have a CPA. And so I always tell my people, before you execute this document, it is imperative on you to talk to your financial planning person to make sure that this works for you. And and usually in the process, sometimes I'm happy to talk to the estate planning person. I mean, their financial person, even if it's a financial manager or advisor or whatever else, a lot of times they can do a financial plan for the person and they can tell you exactly where the money should be and how it should be. And then, I'm like, okay, now I know exactly how to write the plan because now you've told me all the tax stuff that I don't know.
I want to say something.
Sure.
After my father-in-law passed and I went through the whole process, I went back to work and I was talking to some of my coworkers and they were like, one of my coworkers said, yes, I have everything planned out, right? And I said, so where's all the information? He said it's in in one of those boxes, safety boxes in the bank.
Deposit box.
I said, does your wife know this? And he looked at me. He's like, you know what? No, I never told her that. I was like, how is she gonna get the stuff from you, right? Like that's the one thing that and when all this stuff is happening, right? I know for a fact my father passed in 2021, and my father never, ever, ever had a beard on his face all his life. We were going through so much stuff trying to get everything done. When I saw him in the casket, he had a beard, and I was like, what? We never even thought to talk to the funeral home and say, hey, get him shaved, right? So a lot can be lost in all the chaos.
Oh, absolutely. And the time, and when the person dies, that's like the worst time to try to figure it all out. And again, that's the reason why I say that you really do need to have a will, and then in conjunction with the will, a conversation.
Right. And in having the will, and even in having all your documents, because Des, we've talked about this. Where should people, other than telling the person, okay, this is what's kind of in my will, in terms of where should that will be? Because to me, that's
So-
always an issue too.
Yeah, so different states have different kind of things. In Georgia, if you wanted to, you could take and you could file your will with your county probate office, and they would hold
okay.
it for safekeeping, right?
Mhm.
Some counties do that. Some probate offices will do that. Others will not. Like in Virginia, when I called them up to see if my dad's will was there with them, and again, most people don't think to call the probate office, right? I do it. So I was like, hey, do y'all have a will? They were like, we don't keep wills on file here, you know? And so otherwise you have to know, like, a lot of times people will say, well, my attorney has the will. And then everybody's like, okay, well, just in Georgia alone, there are like, I think 63,000 attorneys. Which attorney out of these 63,000? That's not, compared to, United States altogether. But so you really do need to have the original will should be kept in safekeeping. You do need to put it somewhere safe, that it won't be destroyed by fire, that somebody won't get it and try to manipulate the pages or any of those kinds of things. That will is going to have the notary stamp usually and witness signatures in what we call wet ink, which is the original actual ink. And then from there it is and then a copy can be left out, right? And then on that copy, you can leave that out in a drawer somewhere, or if you've got a file cabinet, hey, these are my important papers, son, daughter, whatever. You can always indicate on there, hey, will in, original lockbox or whatever. And then, whoever has the key or whatever else. Right. And if you really trust the person who's going to be administering your will, you can give them a copy of it.
So what about having it like in a PDF form, like a digital form, right? Because
you can have it in that way, but I can't guarantee you that courts are going to accept it in PDF form, a copy of it versus the original. So even though there's a lot of courts, I should say, in a lot of states have moved to like e-filing and digital filing. So a lot of original documents are no longer coming into the courts. There are a lot of probate courts that aren't necessarily on that track yet.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of probate courts that still want the wet document, that that original. So having a PDF form is good too, but I think you need to have it. I mean, and in the worst case scenario, if you can't find the originals, PDF will do, so long as it's executed properly. So in most states, you have to have 2 witnesses and a notary, but you have to check with then for Georgia, that makes it your will a self-proving will.
For me and my brother, she contacted us because we didn't know my mom even had one. That's another thing. So it was, having that conversation is important. One question I want to ask, because I think I did it and someone had to tell me not to, putting children under 18 as a beneficiary.
So when that happens, what's going to happen in a will, what's going to happen in most states is the government's then going to be all up in your business, okay? Because they're not just going to give money to a child under the age of 18. They are going to appoint a conservator for that child. So if you're going to leave something to a child that's under the age of 18, it would be a good idea to say, if you have a specific person in mind that you want to be a conservator for that person, I want this person to be a conservator, and I do or don't want them to, have to put up extra bonds or whatever. And again, that's going to be depending on your state law, as to whether or not that process is available. But in most states, they have that conservatorship for people who are incapacitated or for children. And again, you're going to have to account for every dollar that's spent for that child, give an accounting usually every year, and those kinds of things, for that money that comes in.
So how does that work with Social Security? Because the child's underage, they pass away, they should start getting Social Security checks from the parent, right, or parents. Yep. How does that work?
Whatever parent has custody, whatever person has custody, will be able to take that court order to the Social Security office and get the payments made to them.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I got discombobulated because someone just messaged me saying that they're trying to ask questions and Mega is not allowing it. So I'm not sure what's going on. One of the other questions that I wanted to ask as well is, it what have you found has been the reason why there's been, in our communities, people just don't want to talk about this, um, versus other communities. um, what have you seen?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, I'm not the expert at it, right?
Right.
But I think a lot of it is I'm at a phase where I'm 42 and my mom is in her 70s, right?
Oh, you're young.
And I tell people all the time that it is hard raising parents. It is so hard raising parents. They are so hard headed. Oh my goodness. And so sometimes I think it's, sometimes it's I'm invincible. I'm never like nothing's ever gonna happen to me. Like you don't have to worry about my stuff. This is my stuff. But I think some of it is too, like it's that stigma of, right, I don't want people in my business like that. I don't want, it's us as a Black community not talking about stuff because we want to keep it to ourselves. The little bit we got, we don't want to risk somebody else coming in and taking away from us. And we feel like because if we go to a lawyer and speak to somebody about what we have, somehow it'll be diminished in some way. Versus making sure that we protect it for the people who we want it to go to, or for ourselves even, because estate planning isn't just planning for you when you die. It's planning for your long-term. It's also planning for your long-term care. It's planning for all of those kinds of things and making sure that, like your family knows how to take care of you if you get to a part where you can't take care of yourself. And I think that is one of those things that we just, a lot of times we've lost our sense of community. And we tend to we tend to feel like we're operating in a silo and that we don't have those folks around us that support us. Those are just some of my thoughts.
I'd like to add something.
Sure.
I've realized that the older you get, at some point, you start losing a lot of friends and family. So at some point you're going to be there. Someone coming to talk to you about it seems like it's pushing you over the edge at times, right? Like, I'm not going anywhere. It seems like they're in their mind, I still have 15, 20 more years to live. So why are you coming to me with this, right?
Yep.
And I mean, last year, my brother and I, we went back to the island to help my mom clean out some stuff. And my mom went off on me. I'm looking at her like, I'm just trying to help. Yeah, but she felt
That's
like
her stuff.
And not only that, she felt like, well, I can do this, right? I don't need anybody to make any decisions for me. And my brother looked at me, he said, yeah, that's why I don't say anything. And so at that point, I was like, I can understand, because at 55, right, and seeing a lot of my friends or people that I'm close to, right, a lot of stuff is happening. My outlook changed, right? Because I keep telling my friends, in 15 years, I'll be 70. 15 years, that's not far, right? And so in the blink of an eye, I'll be 60. And then, but I can understand. I flew to Florida last weekend, and weekend before. And I was on a plane next to an 84-year-old woman. And she's walking around and all this stuff, and just having a conversation. She said, "You know what's the hardest thing?" She said, "The hardest thing for me is picking up the phone to try and call one of my childhood friends and forgetting that they have passed away."
Yeah.
I was like, wow. And she's 84, right? So she's like lost probably a lot of friends, right? But she still has some of her siblings around and stuff like that. And so I never thought about that, because I guess that's pretty.
Still think you're young.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that because I remember my dad would always tell me, like almost every other month, he's going to a funeral.
Yeah.
And
yep.
for me,
You get
I'm
to
like,
those phases in your life.
Yeah, I'm like,
Yeah.
That's got to be daunting at times, because at some point you're going to be there, right?
Yeah.
And kind of like a reminder.
True. That's true. Let me, Karen said, what is the simplest way to do an irrevocable trust? And do you have to go through an attorney?
Uh, I would tell you that you should absolutely go through an attorney. The way that everything is written up, and you can attempt to do it yourself, but if you don't do it correctly, there could be pretty dire consequences for not doing it. And just make sure that you fund the trust because if you don't actually put anything in it, it doesn't belong to the trust, and you've got a trust with nothing in it because you didn't transfer your deed to your house or whatever else into the trust. So,
And then, like
Wow.
you said, also do it in conjunction with a
Will.
CPA.
and do it in conjunction with the CPA. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And then Halima asked, can you live in one state and create a trust in a different state?
Absolutely. So an example of that would be, let's say you owned property in Georgia, and you got a job opportunity in California, for example. And now you've gone out to California and you've bought a new house and everything else. That's the perfect opportunity where you want to do a trust, or put your property in Georgia in an LLC, because when you die, your estate gets probated in the county that you last lived before your death, and it's only going to include the property in California. It's not going to include the property in Georgia. So then whoever your executor is then now has to go to Georgia and probate your estate in Georgia all over again because you didn't do something with the secondary other property that you have there. So that's a great example of when you might want to have a trust or an LLC or some other entity that's not you if you're living in multiple states.
Mm-hmm.
When you say fund it, exactly what you mean by funding the trust?
So if, let's say, for example, you got 50 grand, Neil, we know you got it. We're going to ask you for a loan at the end of this. But let's say you got 50 grand in your bank account, right? And let's say that you don't want, you don't necessarily want to leave it to the beneficiaries, and you want to make it a trust asset, right? So you would put that money over you would put it into a bank account in the trust name under the trust EIN. That is now an asset of the trust because it's not in your name. It's not, there. A good example of where that really comes into play is when you're starting to plan for what happens for long-term care for yourself and things like that. People need to make sure they understand that Medicare, I think I said it right. Medicare. Yep. I always get Medicare and Medicaid confusing. They're just too close to names. But anyway, Medicare has a 5-year look back. So if you go into a nursing home and you have a house or you have assets like big money in your bank account, and Medicare finds out about that, they're going to require you to spend down every dollar that you have before they would kick in and start paying for your nursing home.
Wow.
And some of those things. And what a 5-year look back means is, and we just consulted on a case like this not that long ago. The kids put the mom in the nursing home because she had to go into a nursing home. They needed that level of skilled care. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have to have it, right? And the mom had a house. They sold the house. The kids sold the house because it was jointly owned by mom and the kids. So they sold the house, got like $600,000 for the house, and they proceeded to go about their merry little life.
What?
And Medicaid said, ho, not so. Run us our money for the sale of that house. Because we went and looked back. That transfer to your kids was less than 5 years ago. And not only was it transferred to your kids less than 5 years ago, the the house is still partially in her name too. So y'all don't get to keep any of this money. We want all $600,000, and we want that to pay her bill, because her nursing home bill at this point is $1 million for all the skilled care and nursing that she's needed.
Wow.
You gonna pay us back?
Yeah, when we were looking for a home in Florida, they were asking a lot of questions about, does he have a house? Is it paid for? How much is it worth? All this stuff. and everything was pretty much based upon that. Like
Mhm.
they,
Mhm.
And that's where trust come into play, because again, a trust is not you. So if you have substantial assets, a trust and you are separate entities. So you are not a trust, and so it's not owned by you. And you've got that, and you want to do it well enough in advance. I mean, you never know when you might need long-term care, right?
Mhm.
But you want to do it long enough, early enough in advance, so that it's not in your name. So you're not forced to spend down those assets before you're able to get that additional assistance.
Makes sense.
can you put your, let's say, not 401k, but like if you have a retirement, can you put your retirement plan in the trust?
I wouldn't suggest doing that. Um, just because if you take the money out of the 401k, and I don't know that it's even possible. I don't think you can do it. I
Right.
mean, I don't believe you can do it. I'm not a plan administrator, but I don't
Right.
believe you can do it because it belongs to you, right? It's a different types
Right.
of retirement accounts have different types of protections and stuff. And then if you pull any money out of that 401k, it's going to be
Taxable.
taxable. So you're going to pay taxes on it. So I don't know that it would make financial sense either.
Mhm.
That's definitely a question for a CPA, but those are just my kind of, initial
Yeah.
thoughts on it. Yeah.
Um, for us, well, in the state of Texas, we don't pay into Social Security. Educators
Mhm.
don't pay into Social Security. So we're all going into TRS, which is the Texas Retirement Plan, right?
Mhm.
The one thing about that is when you go into that, like you said, you're going to pay the taxes. You have options. There are like 3 options. Do you want to get your money, or you want for the rest of your life, or you can get it for a certain amount of time, and then if something happens to you, they'll take a percentage of the money and I can give it to someone else. But
Mhm.
it's like once you make that decision, it sticks like that forever. So let's say, for instance, you retire and you say, okay, I want to leave this money to my son, and something happens to me and then it happens to him, that's it. They keep that money. It doesn't go to anybody else,
Oh, there's
Wow.
no
right?
beneficiary.
So, like, people are like, well, you're at 62, you get social. We don't get Social Security. I don't have any Social Security to give, unless I work in different entities and I've worked at different jobs that I have like a few points, but to get to the point where you make something, Texas doesn't do that.
Wow.
Wow.
Is it Texas or the state
So
system?
I want to say, I think Florida does the same thing.
I was going to say there's some counties in Georgia that don't take Social Security out either.
No.
And for teachers and just different jobs. And is it the TSP that you guys have instead?
TRS.
TRS. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So it's the school system probably.
But it's just not the school system, because MD Anderson pays into TRS. So there's I mean, it's mostly educators in any
Yeah.
capacity. If you work in a school, everybody must pay TRS.
And I'm
But
sure they do that. Yeah, and I'm sure they do that to protect the fund, right? I'm not an expert on this at all, but they do that to protect the fund and the sustainability of the fund, right? If you die
Right.
early, then thankfully your
Right.
money is able to. It's the same principle as Social Security. I think they're projecting. It just came out the other day that Social Security is only funded through, I think, 2032 or something around there. So maybe that potentially the next 10 years, 9 to 10 years, and then Social Security may not be around.
I don't think they'll ever let that happen. But hey,
You never know.
You never know.
These days, you never know anything, right?
Much at stake.
No.
I wanted to ask another question, and it just came out of my head. Jesus.
Yeah, you need to ask help. Yes.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, this is the big thing. People are like, I don't have money to pay an attorney. I don't have what, because I think that's also a deterrent. Like, I really don't have that much left. I don't really have this many assets per se to leave, right? Or maybe all I have is as a house. What do people have to understand to not be so afraid to reach out, to even think about getting a will or
Yeah.
estate planning and that kind of thing.
I mean, if you can't afford a trust, because trust in some, depending on the state, trust like in Georgia run anywhere from about $2,500 to about $5,000. In other states, they probably run more, right?
When you're talking about
just for the attorney to
fees?
draft the trust.
Okay.
That's not for your consultation with a CPA and things like that. So sometimes a trust is going to be out of the reach of of somebody who doesn't have a whole bunch of assets, just as a house or whatever else. You want to have a will regardless, right? And again, like I remind people, Michael Jackson had a $500 will. And you guys know, I was gonna say, you guys, I'm gonna keep saying it over and over again, right? But you guys know that there are lawyers out there that that operate really cheaply, right? That do work for a little bit, and there are lawyers out there that do work that charge exorbitant amounts, that have all these years of experience and so forth and so on, and that kind of thing. And you can find, if nothing else, you can find somebody, even if it's a lawyer that charges $100 an hour or $50 an hour, to help you draft a will. I said earlier when we weren't on air that I don't recommend like the Rocket Lawyer type of things, those type of will mill houses that are not personalized to you and things like that. But if you don't feel like you have a choice, and let me go back. The reason I don't recommend them is not because I'm not saying anything about the quality of them or anything else. Right. My issue about a lot of those things is that it can be completely valid under the law, but then you don't execute it the right way. You don't sign it. You don't sign it all the way it needs to be signed, and it's completely invalidated, right? And then you don't update it. So the reason why I say it's helpful to have a lawyer, even if it's just somebody who's cheap, some lawyers will review what you pull down from Rocket Lawyers and you get executed yourself. So you can say it when you go to schedule an appointment, look, I've pulled this document down. I just want to make sure I'm good. I just need to pay you for an hour of your time to make sure that my will is good, that I don't need to worry about anything, that I didn't put something in here that's going to make the will get rejected or whatever else. And some lawyers, there are lawyers out there that will take a look at it and give you that advice and tell you what you need to do to correct it if something's wrong, or or make sure that it's executed properly, and then you kind of have some peace of mind.
Okay. Because I think that's a big thing. People just think like, oh my God, like if they've never had to use a lawyer, or they just figure like, I don't know,
And a good place to find a lawyer is going to be, most states have legal aid offices. Right. They offer for some low income fee. They will offer free wills for folks. They a lot of times will know where the will clinics are. I'm rocking out my shirt today. It's got GABWA on it, and it's Georgia Association of Black Women Lawyers. We have a wills project in Georgia where we actually do free wills for people in the community, as needed, and a couple times a year and things like that. And then we have, I think sometimes we focus in on certain professions like teachers and things like that, where we make sure we kind of let them know and get them out to do their wills and stuff for them, and stuff like that. And so those are the kind of things, they're available in all states, right? And I would say take advantage of those. If you don't know how to find a lawyer, like I said, start with legal aid. If legal aid can't help you, start with the bar associations. Every state has a bar association that regulates the practice of law. A lot of times they will have a referral service. And so you can call them and say, I'm trying to find a lawyer to help me do estate planning. I don't have a lot of money, or I do have a lot of money. Can you help me find somebody? Okay. And then they can, direct you on the right path.
Makes sense.
Debbie, did you see Gemini Henry?
Yeah, she answered that question.
There's a lot more to this than
it is.
Than you would think.
There's
right?
a lot more.
Here again, all the stuff with the taxes and all that stuff. Like, you can. It's a possibility you can leave somebody something, and then they're holding the bag at the end, and they're like, "This isn't worth my time."
But here's the thing: I'd rather you leave it to them and make a plan for it, and then tell them about it, right? Than not do anything and then have the courts and everybody else in your business, and then now having all your creditors take all that stuff away. And so all the stuff you worked hard for, the people who you intended to leave it, even if you just left them 30% of 100,000 versus the whole 100,000, that's still more than they would probably get if it were to go through the probate process. You know, just as an example, right? Because now everybody's got their hand in the pot because you didn't designate a beneficiary on a life insurance policy or update your beneficiary on a bank account or something like that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Let me see if there's anyone else.
And I was gonna say, and I don't want anybody to get daunted while she's looking for, that. Don't be daunted by this process at all. It really and truly, sometimes it may take finding, reaching out to one or two lawyers to find somebody who's a good fit for you and who you feel comfortable with. And if you just don't feel comfortable at all talking to your family members, guess what? Almost every single one of us have. We have a computer in our hands, right? So once you create your estate plan, turn the video on and create a video and talk to your family members and say, this is where my stuff is. This is where you can find this. You can even go into, if it's hard for you to have that communication with them face to face because you think you'll get pushback. I left Johnny, $5 million because I knew that he would look out for you for always. And I didn't leave it to you. Right. I knew he would look out for you and so forth and so on. And and all of those kinds of things. And so those are the kind of things that, that's helpful. If you provide that, it provides some clarity. That's actually one of the things that we're going to start doing with our estate plans is offering our people who execute wills to do a video. It doesn't have to be super high quality or any of that other stuff, but you'll say like, I'm a sound mind and body. I got on my, I'm all here. Right. And I'm doing this because I want to let you know what's what, but I also want you to understand maybe why I'm doing it. And I couldn't maybe tell you to your face. So I'm going to put it in a video. Then you could be mad at me after I'm gone.
But that's really good.
That sort of stuff has to have some kind of a verifiable proof of date and all that stuff, correct?
So yeah, those videos will have metadata. Again, those can be used in support of a will, but they don't take the place of a will, if that makes sense. We don't have video wills at this point. No such thing as that.
I don't know if I would want that though.
No, yeah.
After I've gone through that and then to see a video, I don't know if I would. Emotionally, it just depends on the person.
So how would you feel? How would you feel if your mom left you a voice recording, right? So you would never play it again?
I still have the answering machine with her voice on it, sitting in the closet. Never listen to it.
Wow.
Never listen to it.
I'm the type of person that I find comfort in pulling up the video of my grandmother or my aunt or whoever else and listening to the video of them. I mean, it wasn't talking about estate planning, but it was something else,
Right.
My grandmother at her 80th party saying, I feel blessed, right? And, that kind of thing. And that kind of thing is like, okay, if at 80 she could feel blessed for the life that she's lived and what she's done, and again, that's the reason why I say I think it, you put it in the hands of somebody who can handle it, right? Because if they feel like it's necessary for it to be played, they could play it, or they could make sure that you listen to it. If they feel like it's necessary, or it's even if nothing else, it becomes extra evidence for them to support the decisions you made in your will, because now and you don't have to give explanations. You could cut everybody out your will if you want to and not leave anything to anybody. Leave everything to the church or one of your organizations that you...
Or the animals, the cats, the dogs.
Okay, so Lori, let me ask you this question. Say, for instance, you created a will, right? But then you did a video and the video and the will don't go together.
The will is always going to be what governs.
Okay.
Now it could create some conflicts though, right? If it could give somebody an argument to whatever. So again, just make sure you update your stuff and make sure that it's consistent.
Okay.
But I'm not saying that you need to outline everything that's in your will. For me, I think the video is you saying, if you're making some hard decisions about things, or if you need to say, okay, I have this property there, I have that, or whatever. But if you're making some hard decisions about things, like I'm cutting Johnny out the will and I'm giving everything to Jane, that might be a great moment for you to actually cut a video and say, here's why I'm doing it.
Makes
Because
sense.
I'm more concerned about Jane being able to take care of herself. Johnny has $1 million a year salary from his job.
Right.
You know, if you can't have, the best thing is to have the conversation in advance. But if you don't feel like you can have that conversation in advance, that's the next best option, is to try to just make sure that you can, you know, you can provide that to your family. Because then they're going to think, oh, well, she, you know, they're going to think, their mind is going to wonder, and they're going to think all kinds of things. And then now that might create animosity between, it might create animosity regardless, but it might create even more animosity between, you know, the folks that are left behind.
Okay, my godson, good night, Warren. He's asking, is it possible to tie life insurance with the estate to pay it off and leave the property to kids tax free?
So it is, but you don't want to tie your life insurance. You never want your life insurance beneficiary to be your estate. If your beneficiary on your life insurance policy or any of those other retirement, life insurance, or bank account says to the estate of, you're making a big mistake. Because again, in Georgia is, like you talked about, Neil, in New York, Georgia is a creditor first state. Your creditors are going to have the first bite at that apple first. Your kids are not going to be able to keep the house unless they pay the creditor. So let's just be real. Just because you die don't mean the bank is going to give you any forgiveness there. But if your kids get the money and they get it tax free from life insurance, they're going to be able to take that money if they want to keep the house and pay the house off, or your wife or whoever. So you want to make sure it's outside of the estate.
Okay. You heard that, Warren? And then Trisha, she's giving a scenario. A parcel of property, original owners passed away. Both estates were not probated. One can be done immediately, but the other has issues with the survivors. What is the easiest way to begin the probate process?
I tell people this all the time. The only way to eat an apple is one bite at a time. You got to file the first estate. If those estates are connected in a way that, like, let's say, for example, it's a husband and wife, and the wife predeceased the husband, you want to start with the wife's estate, because anything the wife had would probably pass to the husband. And then instead of starting with the husband's estate and then trying to work backwards, because, you know, then you're not going to have all the assets in the husband's estate to actually probate it properly. If that makes sense.
And why does probate, or
I was just about to,
take a long time? Because, like, my mom passed away when I was young. We were 22 and 21, 23 and 22. And it took a long time. And again, we didn't know anything. So in terms of, like, keep talking to the lawyer, which was he's a family friend. But on average, is there like an average that probate takes, or?
So I don't do the probate work anymore either. I do the estate planning, but I try to stay away from the fighting part of it. So I say, you know, so I can't speak to that part. But having gone through the probate process myself in various states, it takes as long as it does. Number one, because you got everybody else who's dying who needs to probate their wills and estates. And usually probate offices in most states are usually probably the most underfunded offices. They also handle, I know in Georgia, they also handle gun licenses, marriage licenses, and all these other things, right? So they're doing all these things, and they a lot of times don't have all of the resources that you know, other places have. And for example, I'm from Savannah, Georgia. We have one probate judge for all of Savannah, Georgia, right? I'm not sure what the population is, but it's a pretty large city in Georgia. And one probate judge handling everybody who passes. That process is going to take some time, right? The other part of it too is you got to make sure that you notify everybody if you're going through the probate process. So most state laws require that you publish in the newspaper. Well, if you publish in a newspaper publishing, who reads a newspaper nowadays? Okay. So newspaper publishing is very notorious to not really give notice to folks. And then if you know where people are, you got to send out certified letters. How many people are signing for certified letters? I'm just being real.
Right.
Or if they get one, they're suspicious that they might be the match, right? I don't want
Right,
to.
exactly, or whatever. So some people aren't going to sign for those, so they have to sometimes they got to go through this long protracted process of notifying all the creditors and everything else. How many of you guys keep a full listing of every single one of your creditors and the balances that are owed in some kind of way that, some family members that could get to it really easily?
Sure.
Very few of us do that, right? Credit card balance changes monthly as you make payments or charge things up. You're not keeping those things. And that's not necessarily something I would recommend. You drive yourself crazy trying to keep track of all that stuff, right? But you do need to, you probably need to update if you have, a consistent credit card in some place or whatever else. Again, probably do need to have some to document it somewhere, right?
Right.
Not necessarily the balances, but who your creditors are, because your people are then going to have to go through all of your papers, or at least you need to have the most recent statement somewhere that can be found, because they're going to have to go through all of your papers for the last however many years, potentially 7 years, I would say. Some credit cards can sue people up to 20 years. So,
Wow.
so they got to go through everything, pull your credit report, all of those kinds of things, just to make sure that they list every creditor and they get everybody down, and and things like that. So it like I said, all of that stuff takes just so much time. Yeah,
But that's not every state, right?
That's not every single state. I mean, some states are very creditor heavy, but usually in every state there's going to be some notice requirement that has to go out to heirs, and any other persons that might want to make a claim against the estate.
I don't even remember going through probate with my mom's stuff. I really don't.
And most people don't.
I think because my mom's stuff was so cut and dry, it was like very specific. There was not room for error, no wiggle room, no anything.
Yeah.
How many kids she has?
2.
You guys are cool with each other, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, there was no argument. He went to one bank, I went to the other. We finished the paperwork. We did what we have to do, and we were like, okay, that's it.
Yeah.
And people tell us they're like, y'all are not the ordinary type. There was nothing to fight about. Right. You know what I'm saying?
I was gonna say, we had one of my family members had a house that was upside down and didn't really have a whole lot of assets. It took us 2 years to probate that estate.
Wow.
Again, it's just a matter of, it depends on the court and what they require and what state law looks like, and like what you have to kind of look out for, which is again the reason why you want a state specific lawyer to be able to tell you, well, this is what our state is going to look towards. They're creditor heavy, or they're more protective of this or that, the other. Just one other thing I really want to make sure I touch on is what happens if you die and you have children that are under the age of 18. So in Georgia, you can say in your will that you want somebody to be a guardian of your child. And even though that will be given some weight in your will, if it's not the other parent, in Georgia, when one parent dies, the other parent, if they're a legal parent, automatically gets custody of the child. If you're a grandparent or something like that, you don't feel, and dad has been in and out of jail, and he's might be illegal, and he's a legal father, which means he's established his rights to the child, or he was married to the mom. You might feel he's not right to be the person. You could go to court and petition the court and say this isn't going to work, and they're going to look at other factors for that. But overall, what will happen is you can say who you want to be guardian. And then the courts will determine if that is still in a child's best interest when you actually pass away. And so you don't necessarily get that complete, to completely dictate what happens to your children if you pass with young children.
So this can be done even if the mother and the father are separated, and
correct,
one wants to be spiteful. They could do stuff like that, right?
They could do that. Yeah, absolutely, they could do that. And I tell
you, when you say separated, are you talking, because that was one of my questions? You're saying separated, y'all are married but separated, but you're still legally married.
No, that's not. I was just saying if you were together, even if you weren't married and you have a child, right, and then there's always some kind of friction with one, and the mother or whoever has a child, decides I'm just going to put this person because I don't want this. I don't want the father in ever be involved with my child, right? That kind of way.
So, like I said, in Georgia, if they've established themselves as the legal parent, they automatically get custody unless there's something to show the court that they don't have, that they are not proper parents, right? Because the court's always going to look to the best interest of the child. When it comes to, like, again, you can plan all day long and, but it may not work itself out. The other category of like the people kind of forget about too is special needs children. So if you have a special needs child, you absolutely need to be planning for that child. Or if you have someone that has special needs, so it doesn't just have to be that they are handicapped. You could have somebody you have a child or somebody who might inherit from you. Let's say that your siblings are deceased, you're a single male with no children, you got a brother who's addicted to opioids or whatever. You don't want to leave everything you've worked hard for to your brother with opioids because he's your next of kin. Very honestly, if you didn't do a will, everything would go to him, and then it is what it is. Yeah. So let's say that you did want to leave stuff to him, but you didn't want to actually give it to him. Then you might want to consider doing a special needs trust for him. You don't have to say why you need the special needs trust, just that it's a special needs trust, right? There's a at least in Georgia. Let me give it that caveat. You can say that I need a special needs trust for this person, and I'm going to put these assets. I want these assets, to go into the special needs trust for the benefit of this person, and I want them to get a monthly allowance of this amount or whatever else, and you can designate it out that way as well.
And that's through a trust.
And that's through a trust, yeah, because the trustee can govern exactly what happens with that money based on how you say in the trust it needs to be doled out.
So ultimately, as you get older, should you look at the age of your trustee, because that trustee might pass away, like after you pass away, and should you monitor that as well?
You should, and you can always do, and it would be recommended, just like in a will, you would have a contingent executor, you would have a contingent trustee. That would be the backup person for your trust as well. Makes sense. And then there are some companies who act as trustees as well. And, companies are, for the most part, are in perpetuity.
So, Laurie, so the question that Neil asks, that's why I asked about leaving, like, kids being beneficiaries. So let's say the mom and dad weren't married, long relationship, but y'all are separate at this point. Like he said, one is mad at the other. If I pass and I leave that money as a beneficiary, it goes to the person that's going to be taking care of my kids. And if it's the dad, then the dad will have control of the money. Correct?
Correct. Yep, correct. Unless you designate for the money to go into a trust to then be administered by a trustee. So if you really are not getting along with that person on the other side, and you've got minor kids, and you have, and that would be kind of the exception, right? If you've got a life insurance policy and that this parent for the other child is going to blow through all the money if they get their hands on it. They're going to buy a house and say, oh, it's for the kids, or whatever else. I mean, once they get that check, they don't have to justify it from a life insurance policy. You can designate your life insurance to a trust, but you actually have to, you need to actually take the steps to set up a trust, because otherwise somebody's got to set it up when you're gone, right? And then it's going to be tied up until the insurance company is not going to release that money until somebody comes in with the proper paperwork.
Wow.
Or you're going to have to get the court involved.
Wow.
So does the trust work the same way as an annuity beneficiary?
That I cannot speak to, because I'm not that familiar with annuities.
Okay.
Well, again,
that time went fast.
This always happens like really quick, right? Go through an hour and 20 minutes that fast.
Hey, Laurie, you're awesome.
But yeah,
thank
you so much. When I was thinking about this, and I have been thinking about this for a while, to have this conversation, I had reached out to someone else that's a lawyer at home, but she says she doesn't do estate planning and stuff. And then, of course, I went to my wonderful cousin, and he was like, "Let me see." And so I'm thanking him publicly as well. But thank you so much for just going over this, because I think, like I said, we don't really want to have this conversation, but at the end of the day, if we're alive, there's unless we're going to be living infinitely, we're gonna pass. And if we have something, it just makes it so much easier if we do it responsibly. Let me put it that way. It just creates a little bit less heartache, because I've seen families where, everything, and we talked about this in one of our meetings, the family gets along really well, and then when there's a will,
that way from the outside. Looks that way from the outside.
Exactly. And then stuff happens. But at the end of the day, it's just better to be responsible when it comes to this. Oh, and he asked one more question, my godson. Are there any good books you all suggest to read to learn a little bit more on this? Or would this just be something that he needs to reach out to a lawyer?
Yeah, I would say I'm not gonna go into a school and be a principal, right? Like DJ. Right. I don't know what you do, and Deborah, I don't know what you do, but I'm
an IT guy. I'm an IT guy.
Okay, well, I wouldn't assume to get on the computer outside of turning the thing on and logging into the internet to do what you do. Right. There is a reason why we all have our own lanes.
Right.
And there are things that you can educate yourself on. I don't have any specific books, but you can absolutely use the internet as a resource to educate yourself on and create a list of questions. And what I will say is that a lot of times what I find is that when people go and meet with attorneys who don't look like them, they tend to be very intimidated to ask the questions that they need to ask. And I've had it happen so many times that they go to certain lawyers that don't look like them. They let the lawyer tell them whatever, and then they are intimidated. And then they come to me and they want me to now explain what the lawyer told them, but they're giving all their money to the other lawyer. And in those instances, I'm like, yeah, that's gonna be double my fee. And I'm just being real, but and it's nothing, nothing, against anybody. And I get it, I totally understand it. But choose somebody, this is such a sensitive topic, choose somebody that you feel comfortable with, and that might not be the first person that you talk to.
Okay. So it's who you feel comfortable with, and you
need to feel comfortable with them, because you need to be able to ask all the questions you need to ask.
Right.
I have a friend right now that's going through something like that for a family member, and I was like, they weren't satisfied with the lawyer. I said, well, you're paying the lawyer, right? They were like, yeah. I said, well, ask him any question. If you don't like what he's doing, find another one. And they were like, well, I'm like, you're paying this person. You don't ever be intimidated. Don't ever feel like you can't ask the question, because you're not a lawyer. And I think that's what happens, right? You go in and, I had to meet with a lawyer, and we had a very, very, it was the ear was thick in there, because he was telling me stuff, and I'm like, no, I don't agree with that. And he looking at me like, I've been doing this for X amount of years. I said, and what? And so what? Like, we went back and forth, and he looked at me, and I walked out. I'm like, yeah.
But they say
everybody doesn't agree with your spirit, and if they don't, this is, move on. Even if you have to spend a little bit of money.
Therapist, it's the same thing with a therapist. If you just don't have that rapport, you don't feel comfortable. It's the same thing. Find another one. So,
and if you feel a block in talking and being able to talk to somebody about your estate plan, because you've got some other, you've lost somebody recently, or you're dealing with something else, and you just feeling yourself being blocked to be able to talk about that. I talked about adding a CPA to the team. You might need to add a therapist to the team, because lawyers, even though sometimes we're known as counselors, we are not counselors. We do not have a licensed counseling degree. But sometimes you just need that additional help to be able to get through that process. And so maybe it's something that you need to work through with your counselor, and then take small bites with the lawyer. Take small bites with, just so that you can make sure you get through the process.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Well, again, I want to thank you. I want to thank you guys, Des and Neil, and definitely Lori, for this. I don't, Lori, don't log off yet when we end the broadcast. And again, everybody who logged in, everybody who asked questions, I'm not exactly sure what was going on with Facebook tonight. But I hope that this was definitely enlightening. Again, we usually talk about love, but the show is called Love and Enlightenment. And just in light of everything that's going on, this is definitely a topic that touches everybody.
And it's love. It's showing love to the people who you love the most, or you say you love the most.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. So everybody, be well, take care, good night, and we'll see you back again.
Good night.
Good night.
Hey, we got some music behind it. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
This is Facebook. We can't just put any music.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Learn something new every day, right?
You do.
I think Neil volunteered to sing us out. There we go. I think that's what
Go ahead. Okay, then. Thank you.